Hey guys, today I'm going to be continuing my SQL tutorial for beginners series by showing you how to create a database in the cloud on AWS. So step one, if you don't already have one, you need to create an AWS account. Once you have that done, you're going to go to EC2. We're going to be using EC2 to create a database instead of a managed database service like RDS because one, it's cheaper, two, RDS, while it is a great service and I would use it if I needed a managed database in the cloud, I think it's good to recognize what's actually going on under the covers. So go to EC2, which is Amazon's version of spin up something, just a single server. We're going to go to launch an instance. At this point, we need to choose which operating system we want to put on the EC2 instance. I'm going to go with Ubuntu 20.4, and there are no wrong choices here. I choose Ubuntu because right now it's the most popular Linux server distribution. It's pretty hard to go wrong with Red Hat Enterprise or its cousin CentOS or even Ubuntu's older brother Debian. But anyways, this is a video about databases, not Linux, so let's just choose Ubuntu and move on. Okay, now you need to choose an instance type, which is essentially the size of the server that you're purchasing. I'm going to go with the T2 Micro because it works for the free tier. So if you just created an AWS account, doing this probably won't cost you any money. Okay, next, we're not going to make any changes to this screen. We're not going to make any changes to this screen or this screen. We're going to configure the security group, which is AWS's way of creating networking rules. Now this is something that a lot of beginners get stuck on because you'll follow a tutorial and you'll create a database in the cloud, but then either you won't be able to connect to it or you will be able to connect to it, but you won't be able to connect to the right port. And here's the thing, in a normal situation, a database would not be exposed to the internet. Normally only the back end of a web application or maybe some other internal services would be able to talk to the database. However, in our case, we don't have a back end or any internal services, so we are going to open this database up to the internet. So we're going to create a rule that allows us to connect to it, and we're going to open up port 5432 to 0.0.0.0/0. And what this is doing is it's opening up port 5432 to accept connections from any IP address. Port 5432 is significant because it is the default port that Postgres exposes itself on, which is the database that we're going to be installing on the server. So normally you would open port 5432 or whatever port your database is listening on to a trusted IP address. You can actually see here that if we click off screen and click review and launch and go to security groups, the type has actually become PostgreSQL instead of a custom rule. And that's because port 5432 is so well known as a Postgres port that AWS automatically recognized that we were trying to open up a port for Postgres. The other rule is port 22, which is the default port for what's known as SSHing into the computer. SSHing, if you don't know, is basically the most common way to connect to a remote server using the command line. Okay, so let's launch. I have existing key pairs that I could use, but probably a lot of people watching don't, so I'm going to create one to show you what that looks like so no one gets left behind. I'm going to call this test key pair. I'm going to download it and launch instance. And what we're going to do is we're going to have to put that file that we just downloaded in a certain directory. So let's open up terminal, go to our downloads folder, cd downloads, and we have testkeypair.pem is the file we just downloaded. So we're going to move that to the SSH directory, just like that. And what the SSH is, that file, the .ssh directory, it's a hidden directory in your home directory that holds SSH keys. SSH keys are the file on your computer that proves you are who you say you are, and it's the most common way to access Linux computers in the cloud. Basically, unless we configure an SSH key, we won't be able to access the server we just spun up. Okay, so now we're going to try to SSH into the server. So we're going to say SSH, and we're going to need to get the IP address of the instance that we just started. Copy the address. I'm going to do SSH-I, and we need to give to this command the test keypair.pem file that we just downloaded. And then Ubuntu is the username that we're logging in as at the IP address. And this should actually give us an error. Yep, it does. So SSH keys are only supposed to be read by you and your user that you downloaded them on, not other users on the same computer. Because remember, the point of this is to prove we are who we say we are to the server. So this error came up that the file isn't secure enough. We can fix that if we go to the directory with command chmod 400. And this command is making it so the test keypair.pem file can only be used by our user on this computer. Okay, so let's go try that SSH command again. And there you go. We have our Linux computer in the cloud and we are connected to it. Cool. So the first thing we need to do once we're inside the box is install Docker, and you can do that with this command. Sorry, that actually downloads it, and then you actually run the install script like this, and we'll just wait for that to finish. Okay, that finished, and you can see here that the install script told us we should do this to be able to run Docker without becoming the root user. So we are going to run that command. Then we're going to do exit to log out and log back in because it says we have to. Okay. Hey guys, just a quick note that we're about to use a Linux tool called Screen. And the reason I use this tool is to have multiple tabs going on a server remotely in the cloud, but you don't really have to use this. In fact, if it becomes confusing, you can just open up a new tab on terminal itself by holding down Command T if you're on a Mac, and I'm sure there's a way to open multiple command line windows on Windows as well if you're following along there. And now we're going to open up another thing called Screen. Screen is a Linux program that basically allows you to have tabs inside of your command line. So we'll do Screen, yeah, whatever. And we are going to run Postgres with a command that should be pretty familiar from the last video. So docker container run, just to review, is the command to run a container. We're giving it the container a name of PostgreSDB, and we're opening port 5432. Remember, that was the port we wanted to open to the internet. We're giving it a volume, which allows the data to be saved, and we won't lose the data if we restart the Docker container. We're passing a Postgres password. This is just the password we're going to use to log in. And the Docker image, which is Postgres 13.1. If you want to learn more about this command, then go watch my video, it's the previous video, running a Postgres database locally. All right, so we're going to run it, and it should download it for us. And it'll download super fast because we're in the cloud. And you can see that it now says database system is ready to accept connections. So now we're going to start another tab using Screen. The way to create a new tab is to hold Control and press A, and then you release Control and A at the same time and press C quickly thereafter. And Control A release N allows us to switch the tabs. And now that we have Postgres running in a tab, we can exit this tab and come back to it whenever we want, and it'll still be running. So to detach from a screen, you actually have to use a keyboard shortcut. You press and hold Control and press A while you're still holding Control. Then you release Control and A, and you press the letter D. So Control A, release D, and you can see that we detached from that screen. If you do screen dash ls, you can see that there's a screen running. If we wanted to reattach to it, we can do screen dash r, and we reattached. And here it is. Okay, so let's detach again, exit our computer in the cloud. So I'm going to assume that a lot of people watching this video do not have PSQL installed on their local laptop, and instead of installing PSQL on our machines, which probably would take a bunch of dependencies and stuff like that, we're also going to use Docker to install PSQL on our machine and connect to the database in the cloud from that Docker container running locally. So to do that, you just have to run this command, docker run -it postgres bash, and what that's going to do is docker run is running a container, -it means we want to get an interactive shell inside of that container in conjunction with bash at the end, and Postgres is just saying that we want the Postgres image, which happens to come installed with the psql command line utility. So run that while Docker is running on your laptop, and it'll bring up a shell inside the container that's running on our laptop. And now we can run that command that we ran before, psql connection string, and put the public IP address of your particular server there, run it. It's going to ask us for a password. And what was it again? My pass 12345. And here we are. We are connected to the database in the cloud from our local laptop. Okay, so let's do some data stuff. We're going to go to my site, sqlref.com, and just copy and paste some stuff to create a database. So create database. We won't call it real estate, we'll call it my database. And then let's create a table. So create table, my table, ID int, and just whatever name, varchar 100. It already exists. I've done this tutorial a couple times, so I'm just going to drop that table and try it again. Okay. You don't always get the tutorial right on the first time. And let's insert some data. Insert into my table, 1 cal. And this is probably familiar to you if you already watched the last video. Stephanie. Made a syntax error. And we'll try just selecting from the data. And there you go. We are now querying data in a database running in the cloud. Not so hard. And just to prove that this is a database in the cloud, we're going to go to the instances. And so this is the instance that we just spun up, and we're going to say stop the instance. Okay, instance state is stopping, And now if we try to run that same query, we're going to get an error because our server is off. All right, so thanks for tuning in to part 2 of this SQL tutorial, and we'll see you next time.